Oh, thank you for coming back here, because it's sort of, I left the last talk a little bit incomplete. I thought we've got to have 6 days of creation about 6,000 years ago, and I talked about the fossils having to come after Adam and Eve sinned, but I didn't explain where the fossils came from. So I'm trying to remedy this tonight by talking about how the flood is responsible. And again, my commentary talks about that, but also we have a book called How Noah's Flood Shaped the Earth. It's a really good book. And also we have Biblical Geology, which is a good one about if you want to know more about the floods and how to explain it. Because it's such an important thing to understand that fossils came after Adam's sin. And when you have 3 whole chapters of Genesis about it, I think God wants us to understand it. And it's also such a good thing to understand, because if you have a flood, you don't need the millions of years. So that's how you compress the timeline. If you have the flood doing things extremely rapidly, you don't need lots of time. You see, in a lot of physical processes, you can trade intensity for time. So if you have something as incredibly intense as a globe-covering flood, you don't need to have the millions of years. So the flood did it all in 1 year. So here is what Jesus said about the flood. He affirmed that Noah was a real man, and that the flood was a real event, and even the ark was a real boat. So he clearly expected people to believe that was a real event, and he used it as a warning of a coming judgment. So if the flood didn't happen, it's like crying wolf when there's no wolf. But clearly he believed the flood did happen, and he expects us to take it as a warning. And when you look at Genesis, and you see what it says, all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. You see, look at the universal language that God piles on in the flood account. One universal after all the high mountains, all heaven, all fleshlight, all swimming creatures, all mankind. And then you see again everything on dry land, everything on the face of the earth. Only Noah was left and those on the ark. So how much clearer can it be that it's a global flood? Now, one pushback you might have is that sometimes all doesn't mean all. Okay, I understand that. I mean, everyone likes ice cream. Well, maybe a couple of people don't like ice cream, all right? Okay, but sometimes all doesn't have to be universal. But when you're piling up the universal language, it's quite clearly meant to be universal. And even in the Hebrew, the word for all or every is kol, and you have this double kol here. All the high mountains under the whole heaven. That's a double kol, and you never see that used unless it's literally all. It's a universal. This double kol must be universal, even if the kol in isolation isn't universal, the double kol always is. And then you've got the extra pile-ups of this universal language. It leaves no doubt that you're talking about a globe-covering flood here, not a local flood. It doesn't make any sense otherwise. Then you have Peter talking about people waiting the days of Noah, and only 8 people were saved through the flood. That's Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives. So again, this doesn't make sense unless he's believing the flood was literal as it happened. Only 8 people survived it. And then he talks about scoffers who would deny it. Like those so-called Enlightenment people denying, they're scoffing at things. And what do they scoff at? They scoffed at where is a promise that things are going as they were from the beginning of creation, you see. But they believe that what we see happening now is what has always happened, hence the slow and gradual processes in the millions of years. But the thing is that Peter condemns them because they deliberately overlook the fact that you have the heavens were created and formed out of water and through water. That's what Genesis 2 says, that the earth was covered by water. And then that by means of the waters, the world that then was deluged with water and perished. Very, very clear that you have this, the water covered the whole earth again. Now, it's interesting, in the Bible, often a judgment is a reversal of creation. And so the flood was a reversal of creation back to the time when the world was covered by water again. Before day 3, when God separated the waters. Okay, so that's a reversal back to the age. And it's again, just like Jesus has a warning that just as the flood was a reality in history, so is this judgment a reality in the future. And this is what I'm talking about, the flood being all, this universal language. It's a reminder here. But also there's some common sense things you can think of. See, why do you build a huge ark to escape a local flood? When you think the ark was 1.5 football fields long and wide enough to block 6 entire lanes of the interstate, and higher than a 4-story building, and in fact it has a carrying capacity of 340 semi-trailers. That's a lot of, why are you bothered doing that if all you had to do is migrate, like Lot did from Sodom? Just migrated somewhere where the fire and brimstone wasn't falling. But here, there was nowhere to go because the whole globe was covered. So you needed the ark to survive. And you have the rainbow promise. I mean, what is God's, rainbow is God's promise not to do something again. And this Christian college professor says the flood was confined to the Middle East, a local flood, again, being evolutionized. See, again, if you have a global flood doing everything, you've got no room for millions of years. And without millions of years, evolution is impossible. But I will say that evolution is impossible even if you have years, okay? So millions of years is necessary but not sufficient for evolution. But if you want to believe in evolution, you have to have millions of years, and the flood destroys that. So he wants to believe the flood was confined to the Middle East, but then he believes God will never send another local flood. Okay. But God has sent plenty of local floods. But I believe God doesn't break his promises. We can trust God to keep his promises. He's promised us things about salvation. We can trust him to keep it. So we should trust God that he kept his promise never to send another global flood. He's kept that promise. We should believe in a promise-keeping God. Now, so when did this thing happen? It's a very interesting thing to happen, and we can see from the creation, and we look at again, adding up the numbers from Adam to Noah, we get an idea the flood was around 1,600 years after creation. And when we look at the Bible, it tells us some interesting things about what happened with the flood. The promise is 40 days and 40 nights of rain. But then you even have the timing down to the day of Noah's life. I'd have to actually do a bit of mental calculation to work out what day of my life it is. I mean, but okay. But the 600th year, but it gives you the month and the day of Noah's life. So God expecting us to treat this as historical. And also shows that he knew the difference between a day and a month. And people want to tell me the days, maybe people didn't live years, they lived months or something. But God knew the difference between a year and a month, okay? Okay, but he times it. Then you have the fountains of the great deep burst forth. Okay, so it's interesting, the flood began in the ocean. The fountains of the great deep means something is erupting in the ocean, and then the rains happen. Okay, so remember, it's the fountains of the great deep that happened before the rain. Okay, that's what the Bible tells you. And then you have the flood prevailing. You see, the flood didn't last 40 days, it lasted a whole year. So 40 days was when the rain stopped, but the flood kept on prevailing for 150 years. The whole earth was covered for 150 years, and then the flood recedes. But again, it took over a year before the flood came off the ark, before the flood came off the earth. Okay, but even then that wasn't enough. Even though Noah's ark landed on the mountains of Ararat, there's still a lot of water there. So still some more happening. Okay, so look, continuing to go down. See how long it took to go down? So mountains became visible. Eventually, the water had dried off, but in this case, the drying means there's no liquid, no water there, but the earth is still soggy. And only in the second month, on the 27th day, see, accurate to the day, and the earth is dried out, so it's no longer soggy, and that's when they could get off the ark. Okay, so this is what local flood lasts for a whole year before it's gone down. Never take that long. So again, the duration of the flood shows it's a global flood. So I want to just talk about a few things here, just summarizing the fountains of the great deep. The ark floats for 7 months, and mountains appear after 10 months, 1 year before God tells Noah to come out with the animals again. Now, for what I'm talking about now, I'm going to give you some flood models. Now, I want to distinguish between the scriptures and models. See, the Bible is God's word. It's non-negotiable. What the Bible tells you, that's to be accepted without question. But there are man-made models to try to explain a bit more where the Bible leaves off certain details. And I discuss things like ministerial use of science, where the science tries to explain in more detail what the Scripture leaves out, but it still accepts Scripture as the starting point. Now, what the local flood people do is make so-called science the magisterial. It overrides Scripture. The Bible's very clear. The flood's a global flood. I explained that. But what they want to do is say, well, science doesn't agree with global flood, so we're going to have to make science the authority and try to twist the Bible to fit the so-called science and make it a local or non-existent flood. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about here. The science is meant to elucidate what the Scripture tells us, but doesn't tell us everything. You see, Francis C. Schaeffer talked about Bible being true truth, but not exhaustive truth. And one of my colleagues in Australia, Taz Walker, Dr. Taz Walker, he's a PhD engineer and a geologist, and he gives this flood model that I'm going to explain a bit. And the flood model is based on the biblical details. I'm going to go through these things and explain some science that backs all this up. So first of all, you have to understand the flood began and it rose and reached its peak. And then it abated. So you've got different stages and there's scientific evidence for all these things happening. And also what we should look for. So if we want to see a certain rock formation, we could look at what it looks like and see when in the flood it was formed. So first of all, we have the flood erupting, and then the flood recedes. So you've got these two basic stages. Inundatory is a fancy word for saying the water is coming onto the land. Recessive, the water's receding from the land. Okay, you've got different stages within those. Okay, so let's discuss the first part, okay, where the flood rises and what we looked for. And I'll give you three main evidences of what to look for as the flood was rising. And one is that we'd expect rock layers to form really quickly. And one good evidence for that is the fossil record itself. I mean, think about what it takes to form a fossil. See, this is from an Australian high school biology book from my high school time. So pretty old now, okay? Okay, so here is what it tells you. This is how a fossil forms. You see this sort of thing in museum displays about a fossil forming. You have this fishy swimming along, and it dies, it sinks to the bottom, and you see these mountains erode over millions of years. They wash silt into the ocean and bury this thing over millions of years, and then rinse and repeat for the next layer. You see how the mountains are totally worn down now, and the next layer is formed, so it takes a long time to form a fossil. Okay, but now I want to do some science. You know, science is meant to be about observation, experiment, testing, and repeating. So let's look at this. Okay, so this seems to predict that there are fossils on the ocean floor, fish waiting to be fossilized. This is what I see when I go scuba diving. I mean, can you confirm anything different? You're near the ocean, aren't you? An hour away from the coast, aren't you? Go scuba diving and find me some fossilizing dead fish on the ocean floor. Or watch a nature documentary, see if there's anything fossilizing on the ocean floor. I don't think you'll find it there. Oh, sorry. Okay, so this picture, the real life doesn't support the scenario of fossilization, but also some of you might keep fish in an aquarium or fish tank. When you lose a fish, what happens to it? Where do you find it? Floats to the top, doesn't it? Hang on, this picture says it sinks to the bottom. Hang on, that doesn't make sense when we know they will go to the top. And what happens to floating dead fish in the real world? They get eaten by other things, and they rot. And of course, when they rot, the soft parts hold the ligaments, holding the bones in place, so the bones will fall apart. In fact, they've even done experiments. So they put a dead pig and they put it in a cage on the ocean floor, low oxygen, cold, and yet it's gone. Everything's a mess in a week or so. Even the little things to make it into a mess, okay? So you're not going to get the fossils we see if you have this scenario. So here's a better scenario. Have a fishy swimming, but this time you have the fountains of the great deep bursting forth. So you have these huge underwater mudslides, and the poor thing hasn't got a chance to escape. and he's buried quickly, so the scavengers can't get to it. But also he's buried quite deeply, because what happens when it floats, they decompose, they produce gases, they want to try and break through the surface, okay, because they float through. So it has to be quite deep. And when you think of big things, they need more mud to stop them floating and bloating and floating, okay? And some of the fossils even show evidence of having been compressed by a lot of weight, okay? Compressed by a lot of weight, so it shows they've been compressed by a very deep layer, but also the mud draws out yucky stuff, which stops it turning to mush, okay? So you got the mud has a very important thing drawing out the decomposition, but also the minerals in the mud replace the stuff and turns it into mineral. So you have to have minerals like this. So you have mineral-rich mud, deep layers, burying things really quickly. So that's how you get a fossil. It must form really quickly. Like this thing here. Oh, my slide seems to be advancing when I didn't press anything. But okay, this is one of the examples of a creature that clearly formed quickly. This is a mother ichthyosaur, a reptile version of a dolphin. And she's giving birth here. See, dolphins head first, because the air-breathing creatures, they have to, so the baby has to swim to the surface to breathe. You see, born tail first, it might drown before it finishes being born, which is no fun. So we are born head first, they're born tail first, I should say. So they're born tail first. As soon as they're out of the birth canal, they swim to the surface and breathe. So this is a correct birth position for one of these creatures. And yet, you want to tell me this poor creature was lying on the ocean floor for millions of years, slowly giving birth and slowly being buried. But I've heard of long, difficult labor, but rarely. And now, when you feed your fish, do they eat quickly or slowly? Quick or slow? So what do you think of this? Oh, sorry. See, look at this here. He's eating his meal. I mean, imagine you go to McDonald's, you get cholesterol burger, you go chomp, and then you fossilize in this position. You see, this had to be quick. This couldn't be slow. And on the land, the flood eventually went on the land, so that's why you got land creatures formed. And that's why the sea creatures are formed low down in the fossil record, while land creatures are formed above them, because the sea creatures are buried first, and the bottom-dwelling creatures are buried the first of all, okay? That explains a general order of a fossil record. I mean, when it comes to land creatures, have you ever seen fossil roadkill? So you can't get roadkill, you can't get fossils unless you bury things quickly. So that's one thing. And now Scott's going to talk about dinosaurs tomorrow. There's some really interesting things just from the dinosaurs. But just to see things like that. But another reason to think that the layers happen quickly is things like the layers in them. You see, you got the Mount St. Helens erupted like this. It's a pyroclastic flow. It blew its side more than its top. It's not too far from here, is it? Washington State. And one thing that happened was these layers formed, and this is part of a 25-foot layers there, and you see here's a lady for scale, and you see this is formed on a single day. So again, you got layers formed really, really quickly, and the layers often have layers within the layers. So it's really interesting how layers can be formed really quickly if you have the right conditions. And back in my home state of Queensland, Australia, you have these layers formed really quickly. Here's the sunglasses for scale. Okay, so here are the layers. Very fine. And you see, this is formed very quickly where you have a very popular tourist beach, Losing Sands. They took the sand in this tanker here, 100,000 gallons per minute. How many Olympic swimming pools per minute is this? It's a lot, right? Okay, so the thing is, when you have these sand grains of different sizes and they roll horizontally over each other, they start to form, they sort themselves out into these fine and coarse layers. So evolutionists say one layer or two layers per year, but here we've got evidence of the layers formed really quickly, one above the other. And again, this shows it happened really quickly, because what would happen in millions of years of layers, the layers would get disturbed. They wouldn't be smooth and flat and even like they are here. And even in the lab, they've found this can happen. And they've shown what is happening. You have these fine particles here, the coarse particles form a layer, and then they roll over, and the coarse, because they're denser, they fall first. You see, so this process explains how these layers must have formed really quickly, not slowly and gradually. So again, not one layer per year. This proves in real science, real time, real experiments, multiple layers can form really, really quickly. Okay, so this is the evidence for the layers forming quickly, but what about how wide they are? You see, this is another thing. Could they say, well, maybe this is a local flood, but then you look at the layers, and the layers often go across whole continents and even have matching layers in different continents. So not only do we have these rapidly formed layers, but they go so far. Like this goes back to my country of Australia, the Blue Mountains. And I think Scott's going to visit there in a very, very short time too, so he'll see what I'm talking about. And this is one of the famous Hawkesbury sandstone. A lot of the building in Sydney, the biggest city in Australia, about the size of Atlanta, 5 million people, built with this Hawkesbury sandstone. And one thing you notice, it has this cross bedding, which is interesting, and that means there's actually sand dunes underneath it. And how did this layer form? This huge layer going across continents, and these cross beds show they were formed underwater. And this is the explanation. They now believe a wall of water up to 20 meters high and 250 kilometers wide, coming down from the north at enormous speed, delivered tons of sand into the Sydney area. Nice way to surf on, I guess. That's a big wave. So this is 250 kilometers wide. That's enormous, okay? This is not a local flood. This is a very, very large-scale event. So when you have large rock layers, you know there's a large-scale thing that caused those rock layers. If the rock layers are continent-wide or across continent, you know that what caused them must also be continent-wide and across different continents. And you look at the Great Artesian Basin. See, Australia is about the size of the 48 states. Okay, very similar in size, but you see how far this Artesian Basin goes. One formation, that's how people could settle the outback. Australia's a very dry country. Most of the population's on the coast. A little oasis around in the middle called Alice Springs, but most of it's on the coast, unlike America where it's fertile the whole country, okay? That's why we only have 22 million people instead of 330 million, okay? But the thing is, people could actually still farm around here because they use this artesian water. Yes, pressurized water. You drill a well and okay, so very wide. Then you go to things like the Grand Canyon in this country. And again, this is huge as well. You see the Coconino sandstone. That's a big thing. This is what we're here. This white layer here is Coconino sandstone. This doesn't look very big, but I mean, I've been to the Grand Canyon. You look across the rim, and it's like a set of pancakes, one over the other, of giant pancakes. And you look at the incredible Coconino sandstone, which is 518 kilometer or 200,000 square miles. Okay, that's huge. It's about the size of the state of Colorado. This is a huge lot of sandstone. They're talking about 10,000 cubic miles of sand here. Enormous. Okay, so this is not a local flood. This is something going over a huge area, huge amounts of sand being washed into place. Even the angles, again, cross-bedding and Coconino sand, so it looks like it was deposited by water. So a lot of things there look like this was deposited by water over a huge scale. So again, this is no local flood doing this. Now, so I've shown you hopefully that you got the flood shown by the incredible rapid form layers, but also the layers were enormously wide. But the last thing I'll mention is there's not much time between the layers. That's an important thing as well, because you haven't got room for millions of years between the layers. We can see some of in the 19th century wanted to have a lot of different catastrophes, and Noah's flood was maybe one catastrophe, but a lot of different ones. But I'm showing you that one catastrophe is all you need, and there's not much time between the layers for different catastrophes. Like for instance, the layers themselves rule out millions of years. You see, here is the Grand Canyon. You have the Coconino sandstone I mentioned just before, and it's on a layer called the Hermit Shale, and the evolutionists say there's 12 million years between them. But in that case, why is the contact so flat? It's a complete plane. It's amazingly flat there. When you look at it, here's what the outer surface looks like. Look at the erosion. It's so jagged. It's been exposed to the elements, so it's going to be rough and jagged. But then you look at the layers within, where is the roughness and jaggedness? There's no evidence of time for erosion. There's just no time there. And when you think shale is a very soft rock, So it should erode really quickly. And yet there's just one flat layer over another, which shows there hasn't been any time for erosion between them. So again, little time between the layers. A flood deposited one thing, and then another thing, and another thing, one after the other. No time between them. And that's what it refutes what they wanted to do. They wanted to have, okay, we admit the layers have formed rapidly, but we'll have time between the layers. But I've shown you the time. If there was time between the layers, they'd look rough and jagged, not flat like this. Another thing is we have polystrate fossils. These are fossils, means many layers. See, this tree trunk goes through lots of different layers there, you see. But the thing is, what if I'm trying to bury a tree slowly and gradually? What would happen to the top of the tree? Wouldn't it rot? Wouldn't you love to have timber that could withstand the elements for hundreds of thousands of years? You'd make a lot of money if you could find that. But see, here's what one evolutionist said about these layers of coal back in Wales, which is part of Great Britain. The total thickness of the British coal measures 1,000 meters, laid down in 10 million years. That means 100,000 years to bury a tree 10 meters high, which is ridiculous. It'd rot, wouldn't it? But then, if a 10-meter tree was buried in 10 years, that's 1,000 kilometers in a million years. Okay, that's equally ridiculous. And he says it looks like sedimentation was very rapid, but also long breaks in sedimentation. He wants the millions of years. Then he says it looks both uniform and continuous. Maybe because it was uniform and continuous, one event buried the tree and therefore made these layers all at once, not over millions of years. And then you got another thing here. Think about, you go outside, leave a footprint. How long do you expect the footprint to last? Millions of years? A year? A week? Pushing it, aren't you? But then you have footprints in the fossil record, and even raindrops and ripple marks. You see, once again, how do you possibly get footprints in the layer unless it's buried really quickly by the next layer before the footprints had a chance to erode? So the next layer comes in and cements them in place. And that's what we actually have footprints in the fossil record, which again show there can't be many years between the layer of the footprint and the layer that buried them. Another interesting thing is that you often find, here's a PhD paleontologist, Dr. Marcus Ross talks about this. There's a pattern here that you often find the footprints below any animal that made them, not just dinosaurs, but other things as well. The so-called tiktaalik fossils, supposed to be a missing link between fish and land creatures. Then you have footprints which they date to 50 million years before the Tiktaalik. You see, once again, the footprints are much younger according to the dating methods and the thing that made them. And then he talks about this. There's a better idea, is there's no time between the footprints and the animal that made it. So what happens? A flood is coming along the land. Animals are trying to get out of the way, going onto higher land, and then they leave the footprints. Next layer comes and buries the footprints, but eventually the flood catches the animal on higher ground and buries it. And because the evolutionists say the lower it is, the older it is, they say that the footprints are millions of years older than that animal. But we know it's not possible. Animals don't live millions of years, okay? So the answer is there's not much time between the footprints and the burial of the animal. But when you think of the flood, that's why it catches the animal and then catches the footprints, then catches the animal. So once again, not much time. And here's yet another thing, is bent layers. I mean, what happens when you try and bend a rock? Tell me. It breaks, right? So the only way you can get bent layers like this is if they're still soft when they are bent. Now, I got another little video clip from our DVD called Evolution's Achilles Heels, one of the best DVDs you can have, Evolution's Achilles Heels. This is one of them.
There are some things about modern mountain belts that we see that don't seem to fit with this conventional view. Rock is brittle. It doesn't bend very easily. If you try and bend it, it breaks. Now, granted, on a big scale, you might be able to get some pretty big bends out of a large rock. But these bends are tight and close, and you can walk from one end of them to the other. This type of bend and folding without breaking the brittle rock means that maybe it wasn't brittle rock at the time of its formation. These might have been much softer materials. After all, they were laid down during Noah's flood. They'd been compacted down, started off horizontal, but then as tectonic movements occurred, they shifted and folded them while they were probably still soft. So when we look at it this way, what we realize is that the really tall mountain chains, the Alps, the Rockies, the Himalayas, they didn't exist before the flood. The whole reason that they exist is because of the flood.
Yeah, sorry, talking about the flood makes you thirsty. So, okay, so I hope I've given you the evidence that of the inundatory stage where the flood comes on. That's the rapidly formed layers, the very wide extent of the layers, and the no time between, hardly any time between the layers. Now, what about when the flood came off the kind of the recessive stage? Well, first of all, you have two parts of that. The abative stage, the water would first come off in giant sheets, and then the sheets would build channels, and the water would start to channelize out. So you start off with giant sheets, then the deep channelization going through that. So first of all, the giant sheets, and it's interesting, we have this feature called planation surfaces, even on mountains. And that's quite an interesting thing where the top is plain flat. Even though you'd expect, if it's done slowly and gradually, I'd expect to have the soft parts, the soft rocks, eroded more than the hard rocks. But in fact, they're eroded flat, which first of all might mean that the water's so powerful that any rock can't stand the power of the water, but also maybe the rock wasn't quite fully hard yet. That's the other issue to think about. So planation surfaces right on top of mountains. You see, where's the water there now? It's way above the sea level, but it's explained the flood was once covering these mountains and therefore flowed off as giant sheets and planed the surface off like that. So planation surfaces as the water was first receding in these giant sheets. But then you have the water channelizing, and what happens is deep channels are formed, and you have, water carving things through mountains. See, think about water. It's going to normally go around the mountain. It's not going to try and go through it. It goes around it, but here the water's going right through it, which means the water was once above this mountain and was so strong, it just pulverized anything in its way and pushed a gap between them all. So you've got water gaps where there's still a river going through it, but also you have wind gaps which are too high for the water to go through, but it shows that they were once carved by water. And make no mistake, flowing water is incredibly destructive. See, Oroville Dam, it overflowed and destroyed. The dam is made of reinforced concrete, and yet there's no match for the power of running water. And even things that like propellers can do damage. Even made of the hardest metal, they get destroyed by very fast water. It's a process called cavitation. Now, what cavitation does is a little bubbles form, and they burst with supersonic speed, which can destroy any material. No material can withstand cavitation. As long as the water is fast and shallow, it does a lot of damage by cavitation, which is why the water could pulverize through mountain ranges and carve those enormous gaps. That's one thing it can do. The cavitating water of the channelized phase would destroy anything. And you see also things like this as well. Like this is from Mount St. Helens, and you see this was carved in about a couple of years, not millions of years. But you see, there's a very good video documentary called "Is Genesis History?" where they go to the landscape of Mount St. Helens, and they say, well, most people think this is a very old landscape, and yet we know that this was all destroyed in 1980. And it's recovered quickly. It shows how the flood, the post-flood world would also recover really quickly. That's what we saw locally with Mount St. Helens. And this is one of the valleys that was carved by it, and it's called the Engineer's Canyon. See, this river here did not cause the canyon. The canyon caused the river. And this is what we often see in the world, including the Grand Canyon. Many valleys are much bigger than the river that's now in them. And the Grand Canyon is much bigger than the Colorado River. I mean, you have to go to the edge, and it's hard to see the Colorado River, the tiny thing going down the middle there. So again, I think the Colorado River didn't carve the Grand Canyon. The canyon caused the river by being a path the Colorado River could pass through. And we see this over there. They're called underfit rivers. The rivers are too small for the valleys they're in, which means the valleys were carved by something much bigger than the river. The flowing off of the flood in the channelized flow in the late stage of the flood is what caused them. So I hope I give you some evidence for the flood being a real event. And again, if you have a real event, you don't need millions of years. So let's talk about what are some causes of the flood. And one thing we don't agree with is the canopy theory. I'm sorry if that hurts anyone's feeling, but yeah, the canopy theory doesn't work, okay? And the thing is, the canopy theory is meant to explain where the waters came from and also explain decaying lifespans. But I think there are some issues about the canopy theory where they believe that there's a water vapor canopy above the earth and that collapsed to form the flood waters. That's an old theory. I don't think many creation organizations accept that anymore, but some lay people may not, may still. I'm just saying I'd rather you didn't do that. So first of all, there's a biblical view issues with the canopy. First of all, the order of events is the fountains. The flood began in the ocean, not the sky. Okay, that's one thing. And the other thing is you got the Psalms, which say, praise you highest heavens and the waters above the heavens. You see, the water vapor canopy was the waters above the heavens. They're still there. They're still there, okay, in the Psalms after the flood. So again, it couldn't have collapsed in the canopy because it wouldn't be there anymore. And as far as scientific things, it doesn't do a good job of protecting us. You can get sunburn on a cloudy day, you realize. You can get sunburned while swimming because water vapor, even liquid water, doesn't stop ultraviolet radiation very well. But one thing that water vapor does do very well is stop infrared, which is why it's the most important greenhouse gas is water vapor. But don't tell the EPA because it'll tax your tea kettles if they find out. Okay. Yeah. So it doesn't seem to work very well. But also, the reason for the decaying lifespan, see, the thing is, if it was the lack of protection, why did Noah have the third largest lifespan, but he lived a third of his life after the flood? So if it was a canopy collapse that caused the decaying lifespan, why did it not affect Noah's age? But I think the real explanation for that, I'll give you what I think is the right explanation. For the decrease of lifespan. Here is the lifespan before the flood. Over 900 years to a lot of these people. That's the dark green bar is the lifespan. Most are 900 years plus. Okay, Enoch was taken without dying. He's unique. He and Elijah were unique. They didn't die. Okay, but then I want to show you this other thing here. The white bar is the age at fatherhood. And you notice that Noah was an extremely old father, even by the standards of his day. He was 500 years old when he had his oldest son, who was Japheth, okay? Shem was next, Ham was next, okay? Now, the thing is, a bit of a biology lesson for you here, elementary, hopefully. Boys and girls are different. Even though this government school system denies that they are, okay? See, the thing is, baby girls are born with most of their reproductive cells they're going to use, okay? So, I mean, you might have 2.5 generations. A pregnant mother pregnant with a girl actually has the eggs of her grandchildren in her womb. So 2.5 generations, because you need the male part as well, okay? But see, then girls, after puberty, they keep on, they one egg a month, okay? But the thing is, men, they keep on producing reproductive cells as they age, okay? And the older you are, in this fallen world, the older you are, the more mutations, the more copying mistakes that get passed on. So older men are going to have more mutations in their reproductive cells to pass on to their offspring. And when you consider Noah was 500 years old, he's passing a whole lot of mutations on to the next generation. Since all of us come from Noah's 3 sons, we're all stuck with it, sorry. Okay. And that explains even the huge lifespan drop of Shem, and it continued to go. It follows an exponential decay. It's a very precise mathematical pattern here, which again people wouldn't have known about to make up. They couldn't have made this up. But this follows the expected scientific result of this old father plus the exponential decay curve. It matches perfectly well. You don't need the canopy theory to explain it. It's the old fatherhood of Noah explains the decaying lifespans. So what we do think is the right theory is this. Again, it's a model. And the thing is, the idea is you got plates, you got these hard plates that are moving on the top, but the thing is they move much more quickly during the flood, okay? We talk about continental drift, but it's really continental sprint during the flood, and the evidence is in the mantle, and it's also a good theory because it leads to other theory. A good scientific theory leads to more fruitful scientific research, and creation leads to lots of research. That's why the founders of modern science were believers in creation. Creation provides the foundation of an orderly universe, a divine lawmaker who's a God of order, not the author of confusion. That was the motivator for the growth of modern science. And so what we propose that during the flood you have these plates moving and one goes underneath the other. And see, this is called subduction, one beneath the other, and that would push water over the continents. It's happening really, really quickly. But on the other side, as this plate's moving, it's ripping apart. That's called the mid-oceanic ridge. So they get ripped apart there, and magma, molten rocks going through the ocean, causing enormous evaporation that then comes down as torrential rain. So you have this, the order of events is right. The fountains of the great deep burst forth, the eruption at these where the plates are ripping apart, and then the rain comes after, caused by that water vapor coming back down. So this fits the biblical order of events. It also fits the biblical description of one land mass before the flood, which ripped up during the flood, okay? In fact, you have creationists before Darwin's time proposing a continental drift based on these accounts. He noticed the shape of the continents matched pretty well, and he also realized the Bible talks about one pre-flood landmass, and this is what ripped apart. And that's what we have in our favorite model here. That's the subduction, the ripping apart at the other end. And when you look at some evidence for it, there's a lot of good evidence for it. And one is when you measure the temperature here. You see, if this has been going for very slowly over millions of years, I'd expect the temperature down here to match the temperature of the surrounding rock. There's maybe 1,000+ degrees of difference between that. So surely it would have had a chance to warm up to the surrounding rocks if it had been pushed there slowly and had been there for millions of years. But also, the temperature is pretty much the same, which means they probably went down at the same time. Not millions of years between to push its way down. So this is good evidence that this happened very recently, thousands of years ago, not millions of years ago, but also very quickly. So this seems to make a lot of sense about how it explains the rocks we see, but also explains how the flood happened. First, the fountains of the great deep, then the rainfall happened as a result of that. Okay, so that's one good thing here. So, interesting. Okay, another question to ask is where did the floodwater go? Well, here's an easy answer there. Here it is. Well, the earth is currently covered 70% by water. And you know, if you flatten the mountains down and raise the ocean bottom so everything was totally smooth, the water would cover the whole earth to about 2 miles deep. So there's plenty of water to cover the whole earth. All you have to do is make it more even. And the Psalm 104 talks about the mountains rising, the valleys sinking, and the water running off from the high parts to the low parts. That makes the most sense, I think. Now, it's interesting, they're quite happy to believe in huge floods on Mars. They even talk about a Noahic epoch on Mars. Noahic meaning after Noah. But hang on, there's no liquid water on Mars, but they're happy to believe in floods on this planet, but not floods on this planet. course, a flood on this planet means that God judges sin. That's the issue. So let's summarize what we can see here as the flood is definitely a real event, and it was clearly historical. It happened in real history. It was not too long ago, as shown by the evidence I've given you about the plates and the cool temperature here, but also it had to be global, as shown by the biblical language, but also by the huge extent of the rock layers we see, and the flood erases the millions of years. And that is why it's such an important thing for Christians to understand, why the flood erases millions of years. And I want to just show you that the best resource you can have, I think, is our Creation magazine. Anyone know about this one here? It's been going for 47 years now. Goes to over 100 countries around the world. I've been involved with it for about half that time. And it's been the best witnessing tool, because here's an example of a guy who was given Creation magazine. Some people were using it as a witnessing tool. He'd abandoned his childhood faith, but he realized, reading the magazine, evolution hasn't got a leg to stand on. There must be a creator, which means, how do I become right with my creator? I must be accountable to him. So every magazine presents the gospel. And also is a great magazine for your family. This is a lady who has given the magazine, and it was good for her own faith, but she could teach her children the truth of creation as well, because the government schools won't do it, and to witness to her friends. And when it comes to your children, it's not a question of whether to witness to your children, but who is doing the witnessing. Make no mistake, some people are witnessing to your children. All these evolutionary programs and books and the public school system. So let's have a better way of witnessing. So I'm going to give you guys a chance to subscribe to this magazine. And these are some sign-up sheets that are going to come around. Don't pass them just yet, but they're going to come around. When you get them, could you please fill out 1 year or 2 year? 2 years better. It's a Jewish bargain, a bulk buy discount, and you get some gifts with it too, okay? And the thing is, you get a digital subscription, which can go up to 5 different devices around the world. So again, you not just get the paper one, but you can actually give your relatives in different countries the digital code we'll send you, and you get the digital one. So when you take this, could you please fill this out, put your name and address so we can send it to you. And please don't go away there. Please come to the book table with lovely ladies there who are helping at the book table, and you can get some gifts with the magazine. So fill out 1 year or 2 year, put your name and address, and you get the gifts. These are the gifts you get. So you get the first issue is right on the table. The current issue is on the table, so you can get it right away. Digital versions to share, but also if you buy for 2 years, you get those, plus you get 2 videos too. So again, a real Jewish bargain, 2 free DVDs as well, okay? But documentary made about Darwin, but this new one we're offering was called Why Does a God Allow Bad Things? Okay, so you're going to pass the clipboards around now. I hope you understand it. So please fill it out, tear it off, give it to the next person, but then give the sheet to the ladies at the book table, please. So here's what it looks like. You've got this great full color thing, how attractive it is. You also get some monthly newsletters too, so we keep you occupied every month of the year. And here's a classic article, how the dating methods work. This is not about how boys meet girls. It's about how old things are and how we know. And here's a case for the flood. We have this in Yorkshire in northern England, you have this fountain so rich in minerals that it turns things to stone. So it shows you how you can fossilize quickly. Every magazine has an interview with a Bible-believing scientist. This is Dr. Steve Austin talking about the Grand Canyon, PhD geologist. Carbon dating we cover here. Dating methods like diamonds are very good evidence for a young age, because carbon-14 decays so quickly that if you find carbon-14 stuff, it can't be old. It should have gone in 100,000 years. And yet these diamonds, which are the hardest substance on earth, apart from the human heart, they are clearly must be younger than 100,000 years if carbon-14 is. So we have an article called Diamonds, a Creationist's Best Friend. And we even have kids' pages too. See, here's a series I did on astronomy here. And I'm doing one on the flood right now, actually. I'm doing a series on the flood. And this is the starter pack, which I think Scott would vouch for as a really important thing. Again, my first book, Refuting Evolution, for the high school students to refute the evolution in the biology classes. And the Creation Answers book, which I think we're going to do a Q&A tomorrow. And I think a lot of the questions you'll ask will actually be covered in this book. And again, it has a free DVD. So again, it's a real Jewish bargain here. Okay, and Exploring Geology with Mr. Hibb will cover some things for the middle schools that I've been talking about here. Another one you might like is called Christianity for Skeptics, which is about how we can defend Christianity against other religions, against atheism, why we trust the Bible to be true, why Christ is the only Savior. All that is covered here. And I also want to mention we're having a conference in Colorado in July, which is about the flood and how we can use that to defend our faith, but creation, the flood. So it's a unique conference here with some new speakers and some old ones. So that's coming up in July. And please spread the word, tell people about that. So thanks very much for your attention. I finished a bit early, so hopefully you can get an earlier night. So thanks again. God bless. See you tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarfati. What we're going to do, tomorrow we're going to start at 9 o'clock. We're going to have coffee for you, some pastries, in case you get here. Like I said, we'll make sure. But we'll start with worship tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Encourage you to fill out the information that's going around. Also, stop by the book table. So no hurry for you to leave. Feel free to hang around and visit the book table. So we'll see you tomorrow. What time? 9 o'clock. All right. Blessings to you. Blessings to you. Yes.
Can you call